Hi everyone, welcome to today's What and Why of MVP webinar. Thanks for coming along. So it looks like it's now 10 a.m, so we'll get started. I'm Chloe, I'm Reinteractive's Community Manager, and today James McGrath, our Development Manager, will be running our webinar, and Mikel, Lindsaar, Reinteractive's founder, will be jumping in every now and then to share his thoughts as well. So James, please take it away.
Thank you, Chloe. Hi, everyone, and welcome to what is the first of a series of webinars on MVPs. So this webinar is entitled What and Why of MVP, and it's really an introduction to the minimum viable product concept, or MVP for short, and how you can use that concept to have success with your software and product development. So a few introductions. Who are we? At Reinteractive, we specialize in building and supporting software written in Ruby on Rails and Ember.js. We're a team of 20 Australian software professionals, and that it's a nice size, that 20 people strong team. It gives us enough depth, but we're not so big that we're not going to return your phone calls. Another interesting thing about Reinteractive is that we're a fully remote team, and that means we all work from home offices. We've got team members all around Australia. I'm up on the Sunshine Coast, and we've got team members in Adelaide. We've got them in Perth, Melbourne, and Sydney. And so it's a great team to work with. My name's James McGrath. I'm Development Manager at Reinteractive. I'm responsible for managing the development teams for all our new software development projects. I'm a coder. And one of the favorite things that I enjoy about my work is that I get to ship a lot of great software and work with a great team. As Chloe mentioned, we have Mikel with us. He's the founder of Reinteractive. He's a Rails core contributor. And he's also the maintainer of the MailGem, which is a software library that's relied upon by millions of software developers worldwide and millions of applications. Do you want to say hello, Mikel?
Yeah, sure. G'day, everyone. I'm Mikel. Thank you very much for coming along. It's exciting for us to start doing this sort of webinar and share some of our, I could say, hard-won knowledge of what an MVP is and why you would want to use an MVP. We've been doing this now for about 4 years, and we've touched a couple of hundred different projects and seen what works and what doesn't, and it's actually quite exciting to be able to share some of that knowledge with everyone here today. So James will be our master of ceremonies, if you like, and he'll tell you how to ask questions and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, we'll jump in, and no question is sacred. Please go ahead and ask anything, even if you don't agree with something that we're saying or want to ask something about it, and we'll give you our opinions. You know, they're not necessarily correct, but we found them to be workable, and I guess that's what's most important in this sort of activity, is that you're focusing on workable solutions that are more likely to produce a product for you than, you know, trying to adhere to some dogma or some, you know, laid down philosophy at some point. The main reason you want to do something is that it works, and we found that this works. So please do challenge us if you see something that you don't quite agree with, and we'll do our best to answer that, and hopefully guide you on your path to releasing an awesome product. So thank you for coming along. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you, Mikel. So we also have Chloe Fisher with us, who's in the background. You heard Chloe's voice already. As Chloe said, she's our community manager, and you've probably seen her around at Installfest and Development Hub and lots of other events in the community. So thanks, Chloe, for helping to get this organised. It's been really good. All right. So the format for today, we plan to present for about 30 minutes. And then we're going to have a question and answer session at the end. We can definitely take questions during the presentation, but we might choose to wait until the end of the presentation to answer those questions, depending on how things are going. If you want to ask questions, the webinar software has a questions section on the screen, which you can enter the questions in there. I'm going to be doing a lot of the talking today, but as Mikel said, he'll jump in and have a bit to say as well. All right, so let's get started. So first off, what is a minimum viable product, or MVP? So it's worth pointing out that there are a few definitions of what an MVP is. You could have an MVP that doesn't involve software development at all. An example might be if you wanted to sell a product related to real estate data, and before developing a full featured product, you might create a MVP that is a set of PDF reports that do some analysis on a similar sort of information that you want to present with your software. If you could sell those PDFs, you can improve your market share. So in that case, you've done the minimum amount of effort to produce a product, and hopefully you'll get an answer to your question about whether or not there's enough demand for the information that people will pay for a more fully fledged software product. Because reinteractive is in the business of developing software, we're going to assume that we're past that stage and you've done your market research and you've got that confidence that we're moving on to the next stage, which is the actual product development. So our definition of MVP is from the point of view of developing your version 0.1 of your software. And so that's going to be a product that you can take out to the market and start engaging with your users and start getting feedback from them. So on the slide, our definition of MVP is the minimum functionality that provides enough value to a subset of your target market that they will make repeated use of your product. So let's break that down a bit. A key part of the definition is that subset of your target market. It's important to recognize that your MVP is not going to be all things to all people. It's minimum. So that really requires reducing your focus to a smaller set of features, and to help you do that, a good way is to look at a smaller subset of your target users. An example of how you might do this would be if you're creating a marketplace software where you've got buyers and sellers. You might just concentrate on the buyer side of the equation and leave the seller functionality for later. Another way you could look at it is you could concentrate on power users instead of your beginner users. A power user is going to be more advanced and going to need less. The software's not necessarily going to need to be as highly polished because they can get around the software more easily. Okay, and another, looking further into that definition, we've got the part that says repeated use of your product. Now, often for a product to be successful, you need to keep your users coming back again and again. And this is really speaking to the viable part of the product. If the product doesn't get users coming back to use it, it's not going to be viable. So we really want to provide enough value to your users that they're going to continue to use the product and get value from it. And that repeated use is really important because it's going to allow you to engage and learn from those users. And you could potentially make some money at the same time. Okay, so we know what an MVP is. It's time to explore why you'd want to go for an MVP approach over your full feature release, or maybe we'll call that your perfect product. So what is a full feature release? It's a product that you've got in your mind's eye. It's got all the bells and whistles. It's got every feature that you've ever wanted, and everything is beautifully designed and polished. And it's amazing. It's an amazing product. It's the thing that you've always wanted. And you might think, why would you choose to build an MVP instead of building a product that has all the features that your users will want? Maybe you're thinking, surely it's better to release something that's got everything than to releasing a product that has got missing things. And so let's look at some of the benefits of your MVP. Actually, I'd like to point out that the idea of a perfect product is a bit of an impossibility, but even if we could achieve it, it's not necessarily the best way to go about things, because it has some big drawbacks as well.
Yeah, it's actually, James, just jump back to that last one for me.
Yep.
What James just said there is actually really accurate. The idea that anyone can produce a full feature release as a version 1 of their product and it be exactly correct. I've never seen it, and I've seen clients attempt it, and I've seen projects attempt it, and I've never seen it. There's actually this really famous project that's been running. The name eludes me this second, but it's a guy who had basically hundreds of millions of dollars, and he was a philanthropist, and he wanted to build the perfect operating system. and they've been going at this now for about 10 or 11 years, and they haven't released yet because they want to make it perfect. And they're still going, and they've just dumped millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars into this project and haven't released anything. And in the meantime, all their competitors are changing and expanding and doing all this sort of stuff. So it's a really key point that this mythical full feature release product can exist, because really it can't. The best you can do is a first version of the full feature release, if you like. But even then, you're just releasing most of your features. So that is something that is really important to bear in mind as we go forward. Thanks, James.
No worries. Okay, so one of the important benefits of developing an MVP comes from the reduced size of your development iterations. The smaller size of the product, i.e. that's the minimum part, it allows you to get your product into your custom hands a lot quicker, and that allows you starting that feedback process much earlier. You iterate, you get feedback from your users, and then you can iterate again. And this is an important part of the MVP idea. You're building your product in partnership with the users. And we're comparing that to releasing that perfect product, whereas that's when you go away for the whole development period and you create your masterpiece, and once it's finished, you drop it in your user's lap and say, here you go, that's what you want, and streamers fall out of the ceiling. So we're going to compare the two. Looking at this image, the MVP approach does look like it's more work than creating your perfect product off the bat. Yeah, that's your full featured product, and to be honest, it does involve more work, more process needs to be put in place to run an MVP project. You're going to have to do quite a bit of work identifying those key user groups for your releases. You're going to have to think about what features are going to be going into those releases and which ones are essential, which is not always straightforward. You're going to have to spend more time planning and launching those releases. You're going to have to spend, this one's a shocking one. You're going to have to spend more time talking with your users, which is, horrific. So if it's simpler to go for a single big release, why would you not do that if it's the simpler way to go? Well, there are quite a few big problems with the single release approach, and we've had customers come to us with stories of disastrous projects where they've attempted that big bang approach. One customer came to us recently that spent millions over a year of effort with one of the biggest consultancies in the world, and the project failed and they ended up scrapping the whole lot. Michael, do you want to speak more about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I can't say too much, but it was a 3-year project, and they were replacing a whole heap of legacy systems, and basically contracted one company with a upfront spec with a multi-million dollar budget to build out this entire system. And there was it wasn't like it never got demoed to any of the users or anything like that. There was demo releases, and users would play with it for a day and give some feedback, and then they'd come back a month later and play with it for a day and give some feedback. And this was fine, and it's better than nothing. But the problem and the difference between having some users come along and play with it in the demo environment versus having to use it for blood, having to depend on this product to do your job. So the rationale in building it this way was that the system was too complex to release in parts. And sometimes, there's an element of truth in that. You have such a complex system that you can't necessarily release it in parts. There are bits that depend on each other. But this system ended up failing because what happened was at the end of the process, after all of these, individual test runs, because the users weren't really vested in it, they were just there to sort of give some opinions, as opposed to come to the realization of, oh my God, I have to actually use this for my job, right? This project was an internal project. It was for the company's own staff. By the time it actually got released, it actually didn't do what was needed. There were key interactions missing, and at the end, they ended up scrapping the whole thing and writing the whole thing off, and not a single line of code of that application is being used in production right now. When they came to us and told us this story, I was first floored, because it was quite, a lot. And then I suggested we work out how to build it in parts following the MVP approach. And by this time, the client was quite interested in MVP because, something has to work now. And what they were allowed to do by doing this is they would release one tool or one part of the tool and get that out and get that being used, actually used by the clients. And when we did that first version of the first tool, the primary client came back and said, why isn't this built already? Why are you bringing it to me for review? This is perfect. Let's go for it. Let's get it done across all of our stack. Let's just keep going. So that instant feedback provided them with the ability to go back to their management and say, hey, this first MVP worked and we want to go forward. And, the first MVP was a fraction of the cost of the previous project and actually ended up delivering more into production than the previous project did. The other key point on this slide is if you look at the black line, which is like time versus development or time versus features. So, in January there's no features, February there's a few, March there's a few. The developing MVP or developing a full product, the speed of development's probably about the same. It's hard to say either way because you can never actually do a true comparison test of these. But the key thing on the MVP side is that red line, the potential income line or the potential use line starts a lot earlier. It starts way back in February because you get that first product out and you can actually start billing for it, or you can start charging access, or you can start using it to get more budget, versus the perfect product line where you can basically get nothing until the thing's released. And then either the potential income starts or it doesn't, and it's 50-50. You can mitigate that, of course, and get it closer to absolutely you're going to get income, but you have that same problem. So that's another really important line of this process, that the MVP is going to allow you to get a lot more income earlier in the system, and that generates more interest or energy in the operation, and you can move forward from there. Thanks, James.
No worries. Okay, so one of the big problems with releasing your product in a big bang approach is that not having a product, it's going to block your forward progress in many key areas that are essential to the success of a product or business. For instance, the sooner you release your product and it's being used by your users, the sooner you can start providing value to your users. The sooner you can start learning from your customers and getting that important customer feedback. You can start with your marketing. You can start testing your marketing channels and getting word out there that your product is available, and start testing how you're going to attract these important users. And you can start gaining market traction, which is, the sooner you start doing that, the sooner you're going to find success. And one of the big things that Michael just talked about is by releasing a product earlier, the sooner you release, the sooner you can start making a return on that development investment, which is pretty huge, really, when you think about it. Obviously, the sooner you start releasing the functionality, it means that sooner you're going to get your product into the hands of your users sooner, and you can start those important processes above. And if you're building a massive product with all the features, then you're going to block yourself moving forward on those really important things. And these things are things that you should be starting as soon as possible. Okay, the second big reason for building MVP is a better approach than to building the Big Bang approach, is that, truth be told, you don't really know what your customers want. There's a nice quote from a long-dead army commander that sums up the situation quite nicely. It's, "No plan survives contact with the enemy." Or to paraphrase that, is your idea of your product is going to change once your users get involved. You might believe that you know what your users want, and you feel like you've got a great idea, but you won't truly know until they've started using your product and you can start observing how they're using it and they're giving you feedback. You're going to start getting new feature requests that you hadn't even thought of. You're going to see users struggle with concepts that you thought was simple, and the interface that you thought you'd lovingly designed, you'll see that then it doesn't quite click with them. Your users might not even use the product how you think they're going to use it at all. One of my favorite examples of this is Flickr. It's a popular photo sharing site. Originally, photo sharing was just a small feature on the side that was added onto a multiplayer online game. And when the developers saw that the users were actually using the photo sharing more than any part of the system, they decided that actually they could focus on just the photo sharing side of things and turn that into a product in its own right, which turned into a multi-million-dollar product that they sold for many hundreds of millions of dollars. All right, another important reason for pursuing that MVP approach is risk reduction. So building any new software is a risky business. There's no guarantee that once you've built a product that anybody's actually going to use it. And by reducing the time to build that and release that first cut, we can reduce the costs involved, and less costs equals less risk. So the sooner we get that product into the hands of real users, the sooner we can tell that we're on the right track. And as this slide demonstrates, if we start building with the red blocks, and the sooner we learn that our customers actually want blue blocks, the better off we're going to be. And looking at it another way, if we use all our budget to produce a product that nobody wants, then it's game over as far as we're concerned. But if we took a quarter of our budget to release something and we find out nobody wants that, then at least we've got 3/4 of our budget left to try again.
This one's a really important issue. You can leave it on the change costs, actually, James. I'll just go on to that one. Having that budget and playing with the budget and using that budget intelligently. You see, one of the things I get the most on our clients when they come to us and they're talking to us about, how much is it going to cost to build this, or how much money do we need to spend on this? One of the challenges there is that it's really hard for even us to give an accurate estimate, because actually, go back a slide, James.
Yep.
The reason it's hard to give that estimate on the cost is that when you're starting, say you look at the left here, right? So we're building a single block with a red cell around it, and we're hoping that that red block is going to sell, and that's what our clients want. Now, at the start of the process, us, our clients, and our clients have really no idea if this product is going to work or not. Some clients have more of an idea than others. They've done some market research or what have you, but that market research actually represents part of the MVP process, right? Just having a website up that allows people to sign up to your non-existent application could be considered a first version of the product. Let me know if more is coming. And this, putting that up there and then doing some massive advertising on that and getting 1,000 people signing up for more information is actually a really valid way of doing an MVP. Obviously, some markets don't work with that. If you're going out to tradies, it probably wouldn't be the best idea because they're not in front of their computers all the time. But there's a lot of ways that you can gauge this, interest and this sort of thing. And risk reduction is probably one of the biggest aspects that is hard to get a client over the line with when they're working with us, because at the end of the day, the client is sitting there going, look, I've got 50 grand, 100 grand, 200 grand, whatever it is. It actually doesn't matter what the number is, because it always seems to not quite be enough for whatever it is they want to do. But they come forward and say, this is how much money I've got. We want to build this product. Can you tell me how much it's going to cost? And from our point of view, we go, well, no, we can't, because we can't assume that we know better than you about what your clients want. And trying to pull that number out of the air, we can make some educated guesses on the features because we've seen similar stuff built, or, it's Facebook for dogs or whatever it is, right? So we can start building together some different ideas on the costs. But really, the only way you're going to find out how much the project's going to actually cost is by start building it. And if you can start building that and start getting a product out that's sellable, and if you can get a sellable product out in, say, 2 months and start earning income for it, well, then that income is going to be able to help you to pay for the next lot of development, or that income is going to be able to help you go to investors and get another round of investing, or that income is going to be able to pay you so that you can quit your job and focus more time on it. There's a lot of different things that income can be used for, and focusing in on that MVP first step so that you get something that's sellable really does reduce that risk, and it's a really major part of what it is we try and encourage at Reinteractive. In fact, when we start building a product, our mantra within our developers is try and produce something that the client can start exchanging to earn income as soon as possible. And that's the first target. So thanks for that, James. And I think I was going to talk about the second slide as well, right?
I'll talk a little bit, and then
good.
And I'll hand over to you. So when you're building a product that you know is going to be MVP, it allows you to plan for that change a little bit better. If you know your developers, you know that the product features are not set in stone, that's going to allow them to act accordingly and write the software in a way that's going to allow that inevitable change to be done easier. Michael, as you said, you wanted to talk more to this.
Yeah, I guess this really ties in with that previous slide of, if you're only one block in and you want to change color, then it's a lot easier to make that change right at the front. But the other thing is that the developers, if you've got developers who are working from an MVP point of view, they are building your project with the expectation that it's going to change. Because the whole point of MVP is you're getting constant feedback and constant change. And you'll find that those developers tend to develop a little bit more defensively. And what I mean by defensively is that when they're building the application, they're trying to make sure that it can survive changes with minimal problems. At least the good developers will. So when you're building with an MVP activity, you can really pivot or change your project direction a lot quicker than trying to get to the end of a project that's been running for 7 months and then go, oh, actually, we shouldn't be targeting cats, we should be targeting dogs. And then having to go through and change the entire application. And that's another major important point, and something that I hope you can all think with. Thanks, James.
No worries. All right, so keep it simple, stupid. This is a nice benefit. It's like a side benefit of going for the MVP approach. It's a happy coincidence, if you like, and that is that simple products, they're going to be easy for your users to understand and to use, and that means that it's going to reduce the amount of training, support, and hand-holding that you're going to have to give to those customers. So less time spent hand-holding means more time for other more important things, which is a really good thing. But it also allows for your marketing to really home in on that compelling value proposition that your product is offering. If you're trying to do all things to all people, then it's harder to focus on just that one thing that you're trying to sell. But when it's a simple product and you're just providing a simple value proposition, it's going to be a lot easier for you to target that market and sell it. It also is good releasing a simpler product because, well, releasing a product is a bit of an experiment. You're not sure that everything's going to work the way you think it's going to work. You don't really know what's going to happen. So we're experimenting here, and part of an experiment is you want to learn as much as you can from the results of the experiment. And much like a science experiment, you want to minimize the amount of variables at play. It's key to be able to learn from the results that you can see how those variables affected the results. So if you start off with simple and add one feature at a time, it's going to be a lot easier to see how that feature affected things than if you add 50 features at a time. And that it will allow you to see how users are using that feature and how it has changed their behavior, and see if they actually like it. And if the users keep coming back and they're coming back more because of that feature, then you can learn something. But if you've got 10 features, then you're not really going to be knowing which feature actually had that effect. So that's another good reason for keeping things simple and going for the MVP approach.
Yeah, that one's quite a challenge, because the last thing that you want to do as a client when you're coming in with your MVP really is remove features, right? Because your users are going to sign up for features, and they're going to sign up because your site does stuff. But trying to make it as simple as possible means that you've got a lot more chance of actually getting it released. And of course, you know, that old saying, it's better to have 10% of $100 million than it is to have 100% of $10. You're better off getting 10% of your app launched that's actually producing income than you are trying to hold off and put in that last feature and this sort of stuff. Of course, if your application doesn't work, that's not going to work either. So there is a minimum set of stuff that you need, but you'll be surprised at how minimum that actually is. I've seen whole SaaS products launch that don't have any sort of billing system, right? And the clients sign up and they don't even get to enter credit card details, and the person did all of the credit card handling by telephone and did all the processing manually until he got to over $10,000 or $20,000 a month of revenue, because that was only represented 100 transactions a month, and he figured he could spend an hour a day or half an hour a day doing all the transactions for that company quite happily, and he didn't need to manually process that, and saved himself, you know, X $1,000s in development up front, but more importantly, saved himself a whole bunch of time, so he didn't even have to run that. We're doing a project for another client right now that has a whole integration requirement with a third-party system. And we spoke to them and said, look, for the first release, let's not build that. And they went, well, what do you mean? And we went, well, there's already people that are responsible for keeping those two systems in sync. Let's leave it with those people, and they can keep the two systems in sync. And then after a month or two, we'll know exactly what the particles are and what the problems are of keeping those two products in sync, because we'll ask these people to document any problems they have. And then when we build that integration step, we can use real data on how we can build that integration step, which will make it simpler. But even better, it means they'll be able to launch that product a month earlier than they would have before, because that integration step was going to take about 3 to 4 weeks of development. So again, another really simple example of keeping it simple and not having to go forward. And I actually think James is going to talk more about this in one of the next seminars, but I'll try not to steal too much of his thunder. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Michael. I like that example of that not doing the credit card payment automatically. One of the things that you'd get out of that is that it gives you an excuse to actually call up your customers and start talking to them and get feedback. So I think that's a really great way to go. All right. So I hope it's clear that there are lots of big benefits of going that MVP approach instead of that big bang approach. I hope you're all sitting there thinking, yep, that's so obvious. I already knew that. Now, what I want to do is actually identify what's going into my MVP. And if you're asking yourself that question, that's really good, because that's what the subject of our next webinar is going to be, and that is identifying your MVP's feature set. Chloe will be sending out an email about that upcoming webinar, which will allow you to, it will give you the details of how you're going to be able to join us at that webinar. It's also going to include a link to a feedback form, which will allow you to provide feedback on this webinar. And we'd really appreciate the feedback you can give, because that's going to allow us to improve upon this content. All right, so time for questions. If you have any questions, or you've maybe already entered your questions, you can add them into the question section on the webinar software.
I think it's actually the chat box
Michael,
down at the bottom, James, and then
chat box.
And then,
yep.
Yeah,
okay.
And then we'll pick it up for them. But that point on getting the credit card users, while people are thinking about their questions, and we'd love some if you have some. Otherwise, we just think that we just answered all of the possible permutations and questions about MVPs. And while I know James is an excellent presenter, I'm sure there might be one thing that we missed. But that point about the credit cards and having an excuse to call your customers is actually fantastic and brilliant, if I dare say. But it wasn't my idea; it was this other guy's idea. So getting out there and being able to talk to your customers and say, hi, thanks for signing up. I really appreciate it. You're one of the first, and I really wanted to get your feedback. What do you think about the product? Is there anything I can do to improve? And that instant feedback thing, aside from the fact that that customer has probably never received a personal phone call from a website that they've signed up to. So A, that's going to blow them away. But B, you're actually asking their opinion, and that's fantastic. So that will very much engage them. So anyway, if that's the questions we have for today, I think we'll end off. Is there anyone that does want to ask something? Put your hand up or type a question in, and we'll pause for a little longer. But otherwise, we are recording this, and we'll make it available. If you have other people that you think should come along to this webinar, we are thinking about replaying it, like doing another one, and you can invite more people along, and we'll go from there. So thank you very much. I think we'll end off there. Have a quick question.
Oh.
Okay, Bradley, yes, you have a quick question regarding costing. If your microphone works, Bradley, I'll unmute you and you can give that a shot. You're on the air, Bradley. You might have to click the microphone in the top left corner of every webinar. There you are. Can hear you now.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. Good morning, guys. So just with a quick question with regards to costing, like usually with the clients doing, they have an MVP, they obviously have a budget. What is a reasonable budget for, you know, the first iteration of a simple site?
Yeah, really good question.
So it's a bit of a, you know, how long is a piece of string type of question,
right.
But I'm guessing with a bit of experience, you guys have an idea of that?
Yeah. So I actually wrote, I'll just mute you to remove any feedback, but I actually wrote a blog post on that, and I'll put it into the room, and you can all have a look at that. The title of the blog post is "How much will my web application cost?" And it's right along that line of what you're talking about, Bradley. And really, we sort of have a t-shirt size approach to projects. A small project is going to be somewhere between 40 and 90,000. A medium is 90 to 200, and large is 200 plus or 250 plus. And it goes into what small, medium, large would be. A small project really is 2 or 3 months of work, getting the project built, and a couple of developers. And really, most bespoke applications to kick off are going to cover that range. Now, from what James was talking about with the MVP, of that first version of, you know, just maybe a website that's a sign-up form, you wouldn't necessarily have to engage us to do that. You know, you could have your designer whack together a form, put it up on a website somewhere in WordPress, and start collecting names. You know, and that could cost you $500. Once you had some basic marketing in place and like market research in place, and you knew what you wanted to build, then sort of the budget between 40 and 90 is where most of the projects fall into. At least with us. And but what you get for that really is a lot of focus on building something that's going to actually work and get released, and produce something that, you know, you can actually engage with your customers and get value out and go from there. The proviso on that is that the feature set, you're going to have to take some guidance from us. So we actually had a client once where we were working with them, and we were saying, you know, the 40 to 90 range, and they went, yeah, great, but we could also, can we just have this feature? And then, yeah, but we actually also just need this feature, and we just need this feature, and we just need this feature. And every time they gave me another feature, I just kept adding weeks to the development, right? And then it ended up being like 190 or 200, and they went, well, that's way too expensive. We need something for 90K. And I said, well, we can do that, but we're going to have to remove all of these features from it and go an MVP point and build out as, you know, release early and often. And some of the people on that team really engaged with that and really liked it and wanted to do that. But they were sort of outvoted, and then it didn't go that way, and they ended up going with an offshore team. And I believe they're not enjoying that experience too much. But it really is a piece of string question. And if you want, I mean, feel free to get in touch with us and we can give you some guidance on it. There's no requirement to buy from us or anything like that. But if you want to have a chat about that, feel free to send us an email and Chloe can get you in touch with us. Does that answer your question there, Bradley?
Yeah, pretty much. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So if there are no other questions from anybody, We did get that last one in at the last second from Bradley, but we'll end off and that will do. So I'll hand over to Chloe, and Chloe, are you there? Hope you are. Otherwise, that sounds silly.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming along, and thanks, James and Michael, for running this for us. And I'll send you the details for the next webinar if you'd like to join us. And as James said, we'd really appreciate any feedback you can give us so that we can keep improving and making these better.
Thanks, Chloe.
Okay, we'll end off there. Thank you.